Okay, so this is our completed bathroom vanity, and I am thrilled with how it came out. We found this absolutely gorgeous ash wood, and I picked stuff out that had lots of different color variation in it, and it really made the grain of that pop. And with the super simple lines of this vanity, it really is, this show is the actual grain of the wood. Also, this is such a simple vanity. I mean, it's an easy weekend project. It's also built to fit a standard 44-inch vanity top. So you can, like we did, we just bought a pre-made solid surface vanity top, and we're able to just get this thing put together so quickly. And then look at the size of these giant drawers. I love that there's so much room. But then, because this is a guest bath, I have a space for open space for towels and an open space for toilet paper, so guests can find what they need instantly and they don't have to worry about opening the drawers to find it. So stick around, I'll show you how I built this.
One of the things I try to do every time I start a new project is to push myself to learn a new skill. And even though I created these free plans to use standard lumber that you could buy at any home improvement or lumber store, I decided to push myself to mill my own lumber. So I started by planing everything down to the desired thickness. I was working with both 1.5 inch thick and 3/4 inch thick boards. Since I have a hard time holding a full-size sheet of plywood and breaking it down on my table saw, I always break it down to more manageable pieces with my circular saw, and I use the Craig AccuCut and a piece of rigid foam underneath to be a little bit safer and a little more precise when I break things down. Then I was able to take my pieces that were much more manageable over to my table saw and finalize the dimensions to get them really precise. Also, it helps me to make sure that they're exactly the same, because you set the fence once and then cut the pieces twice, or however many you need. If you don't have a table saw, you can completely do this with the AccuCut as well. Just make sure you take the time to get precise, accurate cuts. Typically, I don't recommend that you cut all of your pieces before you start building and assembling things, because depending on how thick your wood is, it could actually change the dimension that you need to cut. But for this plan, I knew that all of the pieces were going to go together properly with all the pieces pre-cut. So that was great. I was able to get all of my plywood pieces ready to go at once and then turn the table saw off and be done. While I was at the table saw, I also decided to finish milling up my boards to get them to the width that I needed. So for my 1x8 boards, I cut those to 7.25 inches wide. And I was lucky enough to have one side that was pretty straight. I used my square to find the right side, and then I cut those down. I cut down my board to a little over 7.25 inches, flipped it over, and trimmed to the final size. I really loved seeing my stack of milled boards grow as I cut them all to the final sizes. My 2x boards were really, really heavy, which I love because I knew I'd have a really sturdy piece, but it was a little harder for me to manage on my table saw, so I played to my strengths and took them over to my circular saw and used my guide track to mill up those boards and get them nice and straight. I also used my circular saw with my AccuCut to get the final width of all of my leg pieces, which was 2.5 inches wide. And because the AccuCut is a little bit bigger, I used the extra piece off to the side to hold it and keep it nice and steady while I cut, and I ended up with some really straight, beautiful legs. Now that all of the boards were cut to size, it was time to start with assembly, and that meant adding pocket holes. So I set my Craig jig to a 3/4 inch thick material, and I drilled 3 holes in each side of the apron pieces. I also drilled pocket holes in the side of the side panel pieces. To assemble the sides, I really wanted the skirt and side panel pieces to be flush with the inside of the legs, so that the outside chunkiness of the leg really stood out. Also, it's going to make it a lot easier to install drawer slides later if it's all flush with the inside and you're not working with a face frame. So I used a scrap piece of the 3/4 inch plywood and put it underneath to help hold things flush as I assembled everything. When making sides for furniture, it's always important to remember to mirror your side pieces, because if you make two of them exactly the same, they're both going to fit the same way on a side, and they need to be a mirror of each other. So I always take a lot of extra time to lay out my second one to make sure that it is a mirror and not an identical match to the first one. Once the sides were put together, I set those aside to dry and started working on the base. The base of the vanity does have a 4-inch toe kick on it, and our vanity sits on top of a floor heat register, and it's important that we have the heat in there, but I wanted to be able to hide the ugly ductwork that was coming in from our floor. So that's why I opted to go with a toe kick. If you don't have that, you could even leave it open, and it would be really gorgeous to have an open area. But I cut my toe kick down to size and my base piece. Then I added some pocket holes around the perimeter to assemble everything together. To assemble, I started by attaching the toe kick to the side boards at the back of the leg. So it sits a few inches back from the front of the vanity. And I used glue and pocket hole screws to do this. Then I was able to set the top base on top of it and clamp that down in the proper place so that it had the same amount of distance on the back as it did on the front where it rested on the toe kick. I got a little excited here because things were really starting to look exactly how I wanted them to, and I was loving how things were coming together. So I hurried and added my top skirt to the boards. And you'll see very soon that that was a bad idea. And I even in my plans, when I wrote them up to go out to the garage, I told myself not to attach these top skirts until after, but sometimes I don't even listen to myself, so you'll see that I have to remove them very shortly. I used the plywood to also create a center divider for my two drawers. This is going to give me a place to attach those drawer slides and a little bit more structure to the open shelf that goes on top of it. So I was able to easily do this with pocket hole screws. Now I would recommend actually putting your pocket holes so that they will go into the top shelf piece, and then you could screw from underneath into the center divider, which I didn't do. I actually attached it with the pocket holes into the plywood base, and later on ended up having to use pin nails to attach it to the pretty open shelf. So I definitely wouldn't have recommended this, and after I got done, realized my mistake here. While the base pieces were drying, I turned my attention to creating the open shelf, and I took a lot of time figuring out exactly how I wanted these three boards to lay out, because they were really not, the grain wasn't going together exactly how I'd hoped. One of them just didn't have as much variation and coloring on it as the other ones, but I think it turned out really nice. I just made sure to pay extra attention to those grain patterns. I used Craig pocket holes to hold these together and was able to get them nice and secure with pocket holes about every 5 to 6 inches on two of the boards to hold them all together. Now for the trickiest part of this open shelf is to cut the notches for it to fit around the legs. And I really wanted to make sure that this was a super tight fit. So I measured the legs and transcribed that number over to my board. I was not going to just rely on what the board or the leg piece was supposed to be cut at. And I marked those all out and cut it down with a jigsaw. And I made sure when I cut it down with my jigsaw to kind of cut on the inside of my line slightly. That way I could sand or chisel away a little bit here or there to make it fit tight, and I wouldn't end up with a large gap. So when I thought I had my notches created, I took it over to put the shelf on. And this is where I remembered the reason I had not planned to put those skirts in. I was not able to get my board in with those top skirts. So after trying and getting super frustrated, I decided to just give up, pull those top skirts off, and then I was able to get the shelf to fit in. Also, I realized I had not thought of a way to attach this open shelf. It was sitting very snugly on top of the base and the sides, but I added a pocket hole to each corner to secure that into the legs, which made it really, really secure. This was not going anywhere. Then I was able to reattach those top skirts. Second time's a charm. Hopefully I don't have to take them off again. And one thing to note here is the top skirt on the front is set back 3/4 of an inch to give those chunky legs really their time to shine. But on the back of the vanity, I kept that top skirt flush with the back because I'm going to use this to attach it to the studs in my wall to secure my vanity when I put it in the bathroom. As much as I was really frustrated with the extra work I caused myself, I was so excited to turn this up and look at how gorgeous the wood and the design was all coming together. I was able to turn my attention to making some drawers, and I used a 1/2-inch birch plywood that I cut and then added grooves for a 1/4-inch panel to slide into the bottom. And I do this on my table saw, especially when I'm doing a few boxes. I'm able to just rip right through this and just move your saw blade every little bit to get that groove to fit perfectly. Then for the final one, I always raise that blade and cut the back piece. So the back piece is actually the same height of the top of the groove. That makes it so I can pull that bottom panel out later if needed. And if it gets broken or damaged by water, this is a bathroom. I cut all of my pieces for my boxes to the final size with my miter saw. I was able to set up a stop so everything was the exact same size. And before assembling the boxes, I had to make sure to get my panels cut as well. So over my table saw, I cut my 1/4-inch plywood. I actually used a pre-finished plywood for the bottom panel, which was really nice. And I really wish I had some 1/2-inch birch for pre-finished for the sides of my drawer boxes. I really love using pre-finished because, man, it makes it so as soon as the drawer is assembled, all you have to deal with is the exposed top and you are ready to install it and use it. To assemble my drawer boxes, I put pocket holes on the front and back of the side panels. Now, typically, I would put the pocket holes on the front and back panels, and that way your drawer front covers up the pocket holes and the drawer back is at the very back of the drawer. Nobody ever sees it. But for some reason, my brain was just flip-flop this day, and so I ended up doing it this way. But I would definitely recommend doing it the other way. It'll make a much nicer drawer box with no visible pocket hole screws. I assembled my drawer boxes with wood glue and pocket hole screws and really tried to focus on keeping everything nice and square. And once all the 4 pieces were together, I was able to slide in the panel for the bottom. But the first one, apparently I was a little big on my bottom panel. I like to give myself a little more wiggle room than this, and it was a tight fit. And I actually discovered that the problem was that my 1/4-inch plywood was a slight bit bowed. So on the second one, I just put it in before attaching everything together, and I had absolutely no problems. But because I had to tap the first one in, I did end up really having to focus on keeping that nice and square after that was in and clamping things up, measuring corner to corner, all of the good stuff. But I ended up with a really great drawer box. It just caused me a little more of a headache than I would have liked. Once the drawer box was squared up, I attached the bottom to the back piece with a few brad nails to hold it all into place. And I can easily, like I said, pull that off if needed if that drawer box gets damaged. The drawer fronts for this vanity are just a flat piece of the wood. It's the 1x8, so 7¼ inches. I made sure to pick the prettiest pieces and make sure that my grain flowed from one to another to really give this a modern, minimalistic look, but with lots of style. So I love how it turned out, and I was able to just attach these with a couple screws from the inside on to my drawer box. And there's our finished vanity.
Like I said, I partnered with Craig Jig to bring you the plans for free on their new project build plan site, buildsomething.com. So check the link below to get the free plans for this vanity and many more.